It began not with a flash of light or a spectacular collision, but with the subtle, chilling loss of a single data stream on October 3rd, 2025, at 4:17 Greenwich Mean Time. This was the precise moment the automated tracking script for the Near-Earth Object Surveillance Mission, NEOSM, flagged the orbit of 3I/Atlas, our third confirmed interstellar visitor, as having an internal computational inconsistency. It was a minor anomaly, the kind of stutter in the data that could be dismissed as atmospheric distortion over the Chilean observatory or a timing error in the planetary ephemeris. But within 72 hours, that stutter had become a global chokehold on information. Think back to 1I/Oumuamua in 2017. The moment that object was identified as interstellar, the scientific community, NASA, ESA, JAXA, and hundreds of university teams erupted. Telescopes scrambled, data flowed freely to preprint servers, and the narrative was one of thrilling, open discovery. Every paper, every observation, every eccentric analysis was instantly available, generating hundreds of headlines and thousands of hours of debate. Now, contrast that chaotic, vibrant sharing with the deafening silence surrounding 3I/Atlas. We have been granted weeks of absence, weeks of stalled updates, weeks of meticulously crafted non-statements from every major space agency on Earth. The question is no longer merely, what is it? The central, suffocating question is, why the silence? Why does the third visitation, the one we should have been prepared for, the one that offered a clear opportunity for study thanks to improved deep space assets, result in a coordinated global information blackout? We know the technical details of the initial discovery, a faint smear captured by a dedicated survey telescope, confirmed as hyperbolic, unbound to our sun, and given the interstellar designation. But since its critical close approach to Mars, the only thing growing faster than the object's distance from us is the sheer, suffocating volume of speculation. This deliberate pause in reporting is an absolute nonconformity with established space observation protocols. It's a choice that forces us to look not at the object itself, but at the empty space where the data should be. And in that void, the rumors find fertile ground to take root. The first, and for a long time, only piece of official evidence released was the so-called ESA fuzz. This single, low-resolution image, captured not by a dedicated deep space imager, but by an orbital asset primarily focused on Mars, is the Rosetta Stone of our current frustration. Specifically, the image was acquired by the ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter, TGO, during an opportunistic window on October 3rd, 2025. Now, you must understand the mission constraints here. TGO, along with the elder statesman Mars Express, is designed to be a Martian atmospheric and surface scout. TGO's primary scientific instrument, the Nomad Suite, sniffs the Martian air for methane. Its color and stereo surface imager, CASIS, is optimized for high-resolution shots of Martian geology, often only a few meters per pixel. It is fundamentally not engineered for faint object deep space tracking. It is a portrait photographer tasked with capturing a distant, fast-moving pinprick of light millions of kilometers away. The very fact this image exists is an operational irregularity. The instruments had to be acutely and rapidly reoriented, a maneuver that demands significant fuel expenditure and meticulous, complex pointing stability that goes against the core mission profile. Why expend that resource for a celestial object that NASA had already publicly designated as a non-threat comet? Look closely at the image itself, the ESA fuzz. It is exactly what the name implies. A faint, slightly elongated smudge barely discernible from the surrounding cosmic background noise, a 2x4 pixel artifact nestled against a field of background stars that the TGO instruments were not calibrated to resolve. There is no resolved nucleus. There is no clear, asymmetric tail pointing away from the sun, the hallmark of outgassing cometary ice. There is only a minimal, nearly spherical coma-like envelope, a faint glow that one researcher publicly described as consistent with a very dusty, extremely distant potato. But here is the critical nonconformity. For an object of 3I/Atlas's calculated size and proximity to the Sun at the time of observation, the expected spectroscopic signature of water ice sublimation, that telltale comet engine effect, should have been robust and pronounced. The sheer lack of a defined coma/tail structure, the definitive evidence of cometary action, is the first red flag. It forces a question upon us. If the ESA systems were pushed beyond their design limits to capture this object, was it merely to confirm its position, or was it because other data, already flagged by more sensitive instruments, made capturing any visual data at all a paramount, unscheduled priority? The image, which was meant to reassure us, instead solidifies the mystery. It is too ambiguous to prove it's a comet, and yet just natural enough to prevent immediate dismissal as an artifact. The blur is the perfect hiding place. It's an act of disclosure designed to disclose nothing, to satisfy the public appetite with a single, unreadable morsel. And since the release of the ESA fuzz, there has been nothing. The silence from a usually boisterous European space agency, which typically follows up a landmark image with weeks of papers press, briefings, and data releases, has been absolute. The ESA image is not the signal. The immediate, profound silence that followed its release is the signal. This brings us directly to the nexus of the problem, the vacuum created by the world's most powerful information machine. We are now investigating the phenomenon known internally within the community as the white noise, a euphemism for the deliberate, structured absence of data from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, and its associated deep space networks. When a Minor Planet Center, MPC, officially confirms an interstellar object, a specific series of technical and public protocols should kick in immediately. The expectation is not merely observation, but rapid data triage and distribution. Every observation from the Deep Space Network, DSN's massive dishes, Goldstone, Madrid, Canberra, is logged, processed for orbital refinement, and then, crucially, archived and released. For 3I/Atlas, this process functioned perfectly for the first 17 days post-confirmation. Then, on October 5, 2025, just 2 days after the ESA image was captured, the stream abruptly ceased. The public-facing Atlas Data Archive, ADA, which had been steadily posting orbital elements and raw photometric measurements, simply stopped updating. No press release was issued regarding the cessation. No technical bulletin cited a malfunction. The silence was seamless, integrated, and utterly uncharacteristic. We received only recycled statements, generic reassurances that the object was under continuous observation and presented no threat to Earth's orbit. The key lies in the technical structure of the cessation. It wasn't a system crash. A system crash generates a log, a failure report, and a public technical advisory. This was a smooth, clean shutdown of the public data pipeline, indicative of a decision made at a high level. Within the scientific community, the immediate suspicion gravitated toward an activation of a rare, non-public protocol. The official line from a low-level JPL spokesperson was that the data was subject to an enhanced internal verification period due to the object's complexity. However, this is a technical non sequitur. Interstellar objects, by definition, require rapid and collaborative external verification to stabilize orbital fits. Halting external review in the name of internal verification is antithetical to the very spirit and necessity of open astronomical science, particularly for a transient object that will soon be too faint to observe. The only rational justification for this internal lockdown is the discovery of an inconvenient truth, a signal or structural feature so anomalous that the immediate decision was to classify the data's existence, not necessarily the data itself. Furthermore, the cessation of updates coincided with a dramatic shift in how the DSN handled observation time. Data from independent academic institutions that normally receive dedicated DSN time for deep space radar ranging suddenly found their time slots revoked or indefinitely postponed, often with vague citations of unforeseen internal maintenance. This is a pattern of resource isolation, a mechanism for ensuring that data collection is funneled exclusively through a single, controllable pipeline. If you don't want the public to know what you're seeing, the first step is to ensure that non-agency eyes never get a look at the raw data in the first place. The only plausible protocol that mandates such an immediate, system-wide data quarantine is one concerning an object displaying characteristics of non-natural origin. The absence of data is, in this context, the strongest possible confirmation that NASA is seeing something that violates their initial publicly stated comet hypothesis. The white noise is not the sound of nothing happening. It is the sound of the machine deliberately being silenced. The volume of the silence is inversely proportional to the volume of the discovery, and the silence is deafening. The deliberate data quarantine imposed by official agencies did not, however, stop the global network of independent observers from doing their work. In the vast, fragmented ecosystem of astronomy, data always leaks, if not through official channels, then through the passionate, underfunded work of private observatories and dedicated amateur networks. The fourth crucial element in this burgeoning crisis is the emergence of multiple correlating reports from these private groups, reports detailing anomalous kinematic behavior that fundamentally challenges the official narrative. These observations did not come from a single source, which would be easy to dismiss as a calibration error or atmospheric artifact. They originated from three distinct, geographically separated facilities: the Las Cumbres Observatory Global Telescope, LCOGT, the iTelescope Network in Australia, and, most provocatively, the private high-aperture project Polaris Array in Chile. All three reported, within a tight 48-hour window between October 6th and October 8th, a series of highly localized non-gravitational accelerations in the object's orbital path. In comet science, non-gravitational forces are expected. As the nucleus heats, ice sublimates, and the resulting gas jets act like tiny, asymmetric thrusters, slightly pushing the comet off its purely calculated gravitational trajectory. This is normal, predictable, and included in orbital models. The anomaly reported by Polaris and the others, however, was a technical noncompliance with the known physics of water-ice sublimation. The calculated delta-v, change in velocity, was not only too strong for the object's distance from the Sun, but the vector of the acceleration was entirely wrong. One of the Polaris team members, Dr. Lara Vance, posted a preliminary, quickly scrubbed analysis on an internal physics server, noting that the direction of the thrust was perpendicular to the anticipated Sun-facing outgassing plane, a vector described as consistent with an intentional lateral adjustment rather than a passive expulsion of volatiles. This is where the concept of epistemic isolation comes into play. These private teams operate outside the established, bureaucratic safety net of NASA, making their data more volatile but also less subject to institutional filtering. LCOG's automated software, which is meticulously trained on the orbital dynamics of thousands of known comets and asteroids, repeatedly flagged the 3I/Atlas data with a low confidence metric, CM 0.3, for the standard comet model. It was, in the machine's judgment, behaving like something it had never been trained to see. The data showed that the object, rather than exhibiting the smooth, stochastic acceleration typical of a rotational coma, displayed what one analyst termed a three-pole signature: three sharp, distinct kinetic events separated by periods of perfectly quiet Keplerian coasting. The response to these independent findings was immediate and highly irregular. Instead of engaging with the data, NASA and the MPC doubled down on the silence. The public data feeds from the aforementioned private observatories, LCOGT and Polaris, did not stop, but their raw telemetry data for the 3I/Atlas region was suddenly subject to what was euphemistically called a temporary API rate limit. This essentially throttled their data access, preventing quick, comprehensive external analysis of the critical raw information. The official space agencies, instead of dispelling the rumors, effectively confirmed them by deploying a subtle, technical countermeasure designed to slow the dissemination of the unfiltered truth. The message was clear: your independent data is inconvenient. And while we cannot stop you from observing, we can and will make it harder for you to prove us wrong. The silence is being maintained not just by withholding data, but by actively creating technical friction against the data that attempts to break it. The ghost in the machine is starting to move, and the custodians of the archive are scrambling to throw sand in the gears. The most potent evidence that something fundamentally non-cometary is at play resides not in positional telemetry, but in the spectral analysis, the chemical fingerprint of the object's emitted and reflected light. This is the realm of the fifth critical nonconformity, a spectroscopic anomaly that, if independently verified, would instantly destroy the comet hypothesis. While raw imaging data was quickly sequestered, some initial high-resolution spectroscopic captures from the Gran Telescopio Canarias, GTC, and the Subaru telescope were briefly released to the astronomical community before being abruptly pulled down under the veil of calibration uncertainty. This small window of data access was enough for a few researchers to flag a staggering thermal inconsistency. Comets are inherently cold objects, dirty snowballs that only warm up via solar insolation. Their sublimation, the process that forms the telltale coma, occurs at temperatures dictated by the phase transitions of their volatile ices, primarily water, carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide. In a region of space where 3I/Atlas was observed, its thermal profile should have been characterized by the emissions of these sublimating ices, resulting in a predictable, low-energy infrared signature. The leaked GTC data, however, showed a striking and inexplicable emission line at 2.45 microns. This is an almost impossible spectral signature for a natural comet at that distance from the Sun. The 2.45 micrometers line is associated with extremely high energy states, signatures typically linked to refractory, crystalline silicates under conditions of intense, localized heating, or more provocatively, with complex, multi-layered organic compounds undergoing rapid thermal decomposition. For a natural object, this line suggests an internal temperature wildly inconsistent with solar heating alone. The energy required to excite these compounds to produce this signature is massive, pointing toward an internal power source or an extreme, non-solar thermal event. The initial internal hypothesis from the GTC team, hastily circulated before the data poll, was that the line was a product of a thermal runaway event within the object's nucleus, essentially an unexplained internal fission or decay process. Yet, this explanation introduces more problems than it solves, requiring an entirely new, unobserved mechanism for cometary thermodynamics. A far simpler, if more unsettling, interpretation, one that demands the immediate implementation of a full security protocol, is that the emission line is the waste heat signature of an actively operating internal system. This is the smoking gun of technological origin. The official response to the spectral anomaly was swift and comprehensive, a blanket denial of the data's validity, citing an alleged known drift in the GTC's OSIRIS instrument grading. This is a plausible technical alibi, but the swiftness and global nature of the denial is the giveaway. NASA and ESA did not merely issue a correction. They issued a directive, essentially forcing the community to operate under an epistemic constraint that this data never existed. The official scientific archive now contains no record of the 2.45 micrometers anomaly. It has been erased from the public record and relegated to an isolated access, classified internal server. The very act of this coordinated erasure implies not just an anomaly, but an anomaly so profound that it risks shattering established cosmological frameworks and triggering a global political and social shockwave. They didn't just remove the data, they retroactively invalidated the instrument that recorded it. The suppression of spectral evidence is the most damning component of the entire silence because it shifts the entire conversation from unusual comet to unexplainable technology. The thermal ghost in the data demanded immediate, total silence. The spectral anomaly was sufficient cause for the official silence, But the immediate, systemic lockdown extended far beyond the highly sensitive GTC data. Part 6 of the unfolding cover-up focuses on a bizarre, geographically distinct action: the sudden, non-public classification of all image telemetry from the Mars Science Laboratory, MCEL, Curiosity, and the Mars 2020 Perseverance rovers, specifically involving their navigation cameras, NavCams, and mass cameras, MASCAMs. This represents a deliberate internal protocol shift applied to instruments that, on the surface, have absolutely no business being involved in an interstellar object investigation. Why would NASA suddenly place the raw NavCam data under an isolated access restriction? The rovers are on Mars. 3I/Atlas was millions of kilometers away. The NavCams are low-resolution, wide-angle lenses designed for obstacle avoidance and local terrain mapping. They possess neither the aperture nor the focal length to resolve objects at interstellar distances. Their involvement appears, at first glance, like a classic bureaucratic overreaction. However, the key lies in understanding the principle of opportunistic astrometry. Though poorly equipped, the rovers occasionally conduct brief, low-priority sky surveys to assist in atmospheric modeling or to check for transient phenomena. On October 4, 2025, during a scheduled imaging session focusing on Mars's orbital path, a common practice for atmospheric calibration, both rovers captured a series of low-exposure, stacked images. The raw data logs, which are typically funneled into the Public Planetary Data System, PDS, within 48 hours, never appeared. Instead, an internal advisory memo, leaked to a private research consortium before being traced and deleted, indicated a new, temporary protocol V27/NAVX had been invoked. This protocol dictates the immediate sequestration of all imagery that contains an object matching specific criteria: high angular velocity, low integrated magnitude, and, critically, geometrically non-Keplerian positional data relative to Mars. The implication is terrifyingly simple. The rovers saw something that should not have been visible, or they saw something that, when cross-referenced with a known hyperbolic orbit, introduced a catastrophic data discrepancy. Even a poorly resolved 2-pixel smear on a NavCam, when combined with the highly precise temporal and positional data of the rover itself, can provide powerful constraints on an object's trajectory. If that constraint deviates, even minutely, from the official gravity-only prediction, it provides independent confirmation of the non-gravitational forces hinted at by the private observatories. The silence here is not just about secrecy, it is about resource denial. By classifying the raw NavCam imagery, NASA prevents external astrophysicists from performing independent, high-confidence orbital fits. The agency controls the only data that can definitively confirm or deny the kinematic anomalies. It is an act of archival manipulation, ensuring that the official story, it's a comet, albeit a distant and faint one, cannot be challenged by irrefutable, independently derived positional information. The most damning piece of information relates to a now-discredited analysis briefly posted by the controversial Harvard astronomer, Professor Avi Loeb. He claimed to have seen a processed NavCam streak, a long, elongated feature captured by the rover, that he interpreted as the object. While the claim was vigorously attacked as likely being an instrumental artifact due to stacking and sensor noise, the critical fact is NASA's response. They didn't officially deny the streak's existence. They simply refused to release the raw, corresponding data to allow for proper debunking. In science, you debunk a sensational claim with transparency. In a cover-up, you defeat the claim by withholding the proof. The classification of the NavCam data is the sound of an organization barricading its windows, ensuring that no independent light can shine on the small, inconvenient truth captured by two small, wide-angle lenses on the surface of a distant planet. The silence from Mars is the silence of censorship by classification. The transition from public discourse to absolute silence did not happen instantaneously. It was a process, a tightly controlled sequence of events contained entirely within a 72-hour period that we now refer to as the 3-day window, stretching from 4:17 Greenwich Mean Time on October 3rd to 4:17 Greenwich Mean Time on October 6th, 2025. Understanding the current level of secrecy requires a minute-by-minute deconstruction of this critical temporal nexus, as it charts the exact path from scientific inquiry to high-level quarantine. The clock started with the initial NEO-SM computational inconsistency. Within hours, standard protocol dictated that the observation be elevated to the DSN-7 priority, triggering dedicated ranging and data acquisition from the massive 70-meter dishes in Goldstone, California. It was during these initial, high-resolution ranging sessions that the first verifiable nonconformity was registered, a small, repeatable Doppler residual that could not be accounted for by the object's projected orbit, the solar wind, or even the expected non-gravitational effects of outgassing. The residual was minuscule, measured in millimeters per second, but its consistency suggested a steady, non-Keplerian influence on the object's velocity vector. At 1800 hours Greenwich Mean Time on October 3rd, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory's Small Body Dynamics Group, SBDG, internally issued a Level 2 Anomaly report, a procedural step that still falls within the scope of open scientific problem-solving. It means, we found something weird. Help us check the math. This is the point where the data should have been broadcast to external university teams for collaborative analysis. Instead, an unprecedented order came down. The data was flagged with a proprietary SBDG marker, severely restricting access even within JPL. The definitive switch occurred 24 hours later. At 1945 Greenwich Mean Time on October 4th, the Deep Space Radar, DSR, at Goldstone successfully performed an S-band ranging pulse on 3I/Atlas. This is the moment the object's shape and rotation rate would have been resolved with high precision. The immediate, recorded output from the DSR system was not the expected signal of a rotating, asymmetric comet nucleus, but rather a sequence of zero-albedo returns consistent with an object designed to absorb, rather than reflect, radar energy. More alarmingly, the data suggested a rotation period that was damping, slowing down, at a rate unprecedented for a tumbling natural body. This DSR result was not uploaded to the standard archival network. Instead, it was routed directly to an internal, high-security server located at a separate, non-JPL facility. Simultaneously, all public-facing NASA press officer accounts went silent on 3I/Atlas. The last public mention was a generic tweet about Martian weather. The final 24 hours of the window saw the full deployment of the silence protocol. At 9 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time on October 5th, the Minor Planet Center data flow, the public service responsible for tracking all small bodies, was abruptly curtailed. This was followed by the activation of the V27/NAVX protocol mentioned previously, locking down the Mars rover's data access. The pattern is clear. Once the DSR ranging provided sufficient structural information, beyond merely positional data, the entire official apparatus shifted from tracking the object to tracking the information about the object. This 72-hour period is the smoking gun. It details a calculated, multi-agency effort to establish epistemic control over every single data point concerning 3I/Atlas. It was not panic. It was a protocol being executed with chilling efficiency. The transition from Level 2 Anomaly to global silence confirms that the data gathered in that brief window of observation was not merely contradictory, but security critical. The sheer bureaucratic coordination required to achieve this clean, near-simultaneous information lockdown across multiple continents and competing agencies is, in itself, the most compelling evidence that what they saw demanded, by a pre-existing directive, total and absolute silence. The meticulous, coordinated data lockdown observed during the 3-day window suggests the execution of a pre-existing contingency plan. This brings us to the most speculative, yet technically compelling element of the unfolding narrative, the alleged existence of Protocol Blackout G. This is not an official, publicly documented NASA directive, but rather a hypothesized cross-agency contingency response protocol, CRP, rumored to be invoked only when a trans-solar system object exhibits an extremely high anomaly index, AI 8.5, typically indicating features inconsistent with known celestial mechanics or, more directly, displaying signatures of technology. The very need for a protocol like blackout 9 speaks volumes about the institutional paranoia surrounding the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI. It is a mechanism designed to bypass the traditional, open scientific review process and place the information directly under the control of a select interagency group, allegedly including representatives from the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO, and the highest levels of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP. Its objective is singular: to prevent unauthorized public disclosure until the strategic implications of the discovery, not merely the scientific, can be fully assessed and a unified, non-panic message can be formulated. The execution of Blackout 9 is characterized by 5 distinct, technically verifiable actions, all of which align perfectly with the events observed during the 3-day window. 1. Immediate archive flagging. Proprietary SBG, this step isolates the raw data. As seen, the DSR and initial NEOSM data were immediately restricted. This is the isolated access function of the protocol, ensuring that only users with Level 3 security clearance can retrieve the files from the archival network. 2. Telemetry throttling. API rate limit. This action disrupts external verification attempts. The throttling of the LCOGT and Polaris data APIs fits this perfectly. It doesn't prohibit observation, but it dramatically increases the time and computational cost required for independent groups to confirm the anomalies, thereby buying the central authority's crucial time. 3. Resource reallocation, DSN. 7. Cancellation, the immediate cancellation of dedicated deep space ranging time for external collaborators ensures that all subsequent high-fidelity observations are channeled exclusively through the NRO-vetted DSN pipeline. This prevents accidental discovery by academic teams using the same powerful tools. 4. Navcam declassification freeze. Protocol V 27/NAVX. The sequestration of even low-resolution, tangential data, like the Mars rover's images, serves to eliminate all possible geometric constraints that could confirm the kinematic anomalies. It is a sweep of the periphery, ensuring no residual data points remain that could provide external analysts with the necessary reference points to validate the non-Keplerian orbital fits. 5. Spectroscopic vetting directive. This involves not just removing data, but invalidating the instrument that produced it. The GTC 2.45 micrometers anomaly was dismissed with a nonspecific calibration uncertainty claim, a clear-cut example of the protocol's final phase, epistemic neutralization, where conflicting evidence is nullified rather than addressed. The most damning piece of information regarding Blackout 9 is not its existence, but the rumored trigger threshold. Sources suggest that the protocol is only activated when an object exhibits 2 concurrent, high-certainty metrics: anomalous acceleration and non-natural thermal or structural signatures. The evidence trail, the non-gravitational delta-V reported by Polaris combined with a high-energy 2.45 micrometer spectral line, strongly suggests both thresholds were met by 3I/Atlas. If protocol Blackout 9 was indeed activated, then the silence we are experiencing is not the result of bureaucratic sluggishness or simple caution. It is the sound of a national security consensus that believes the public is not ready to handle the truth of an artificial, interstellar visitor. The silence is no longer an anomaly. It is the calculated, institutional expression of deep-seated fear concerning the object's origin and potential intent. The archival constraint is proof of the discovery. The silence is proof of the assessment. The implementation of a centralized secrecy protocol like Blackout 9, however stringent, cannot fully account for the scope of the current global silence. Space observation is an inherently competitive and fragmented enterprise. Nations often operate their assets with proprietary data pipelines and competing scientific goals. Yet, the response to 3I/Atlas transcends national self-interest, manifesting as a chilling, synchronous global quietude. This universal lack of data is the ninth major anomaly, suggesting either an extraordinary technical limitation shared by all nations or an unacknowledged intergovernmental consensus. Consider the other major players. The China National Space Administration, CNSA, operates the world's largest single-dish telescope, the 500-meter aperture spherical telescope, FAST. FAST is arguably the most sensitive radio receiver on Earth, a prime instrument for detecting the faint emissions of a distant, active comet or, more critically, the structured radio signal of a technological artifact. The CNSA, known for its rapid and often self-congratulatory announcements regarding space successes, has maintained total official radio silence on 3I/Atlas. No press releases, no spectral analysis, and most tellingly, no attempt to use the object as a geopolitical talking point, a startling nonconformity with recent CNSA behavior. If they saw a natural comet, they would announce their superior data. If they saw nothing, they would announce the failure of other nations to track it. The fact they have said absolutely nothing suggests they are bound by the same external or self-imposed constraint. Next is the United Arab Emirates, UAE, with its sophisticated HOPE Mars mission orbiter. HOPE is perfectly positioned at Mars, possessing a suite of instruments capable of making high-cadence, positional observations of 3I/Atlas during its close passage. Despite the immense public relations value and scientific prestige that would come from being the first non-US/European entity to contribute definitive data on an interstellar object, the UAE Space Agency, UESA, has issued a carefully worded statement affirming only their focus on the Martian atmosphere, completely sidestepping any mention of opportunistic object tracking. The lack of any visual or spectroscopic data from HOPE is a missed opportunity so glaring that it defies rational scientific allocation of resources. Similarly, the Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, which has powerful optical arrays and a strong independent space program, has remained absent from the 3I/Atlas conversation. The traditional competition among these agencies, the urge to publish first, to claim superior technology, has been entirely subsumed by a unified, global moratorium on disclosure. The technical argument that all these systems were simply poorly positioned collapses under scrutiny. While an individual facility might be out of alignment, the entire global network of ground-based and orbital assets, including the Russian Space Research Institute, IKI, facilities could not all be simultaneously and functionally incapable of tracking an object of this magnitude. This leaves only two possibilities, both equally disturbing. The first is that the non-gravitational anomaly, NGA, and the thermal inconsistency, TI, were not only detected by NASA, but were subsequently communicated privately to partner nations and strategic competitors through classified diplomatic channels. This highly sensitive information would come with a strict, mutually enforced non-disclosure agreement, transforming a scientific discovery into a geopolitical constraint. The second, more sensational, possibility is that every major nation's dedicated space surveillance systems, many of which are classified and dual use, independently detected the same high anomaly signatures, triggering parallel, internal blackout protocols tailored to their respective national security frameworks. In either scenario, the pervasive, coordinated quietness of the global powers shifts the narrative from a simple NASA cover-up to an unprecedented international agreement to manage a singular, terrifying truth. The silence is not fragmented. It is seamless. It is the sound of the world's governments acting in unison, suggesting they are all responding to the same, overwhelming, and non-negotiable discovery. The most chilling interpretation of the synchronous global silence moves us beyond terrestrial politics and into the realm of speculative physics. The the possibility that 3I/Atlas is communicating, but doing so using technology so advanced that its signal is perceived by our instruments as absolute white noise. This is the hypothesis of the quantum shadow, which posits that the lack of conventional radio or optical emissions is not proof of inactivity, but proof of an immensely efficient, invisible form of interstellar communication. Traditional SETI protocols rely on detecting either narrowband radio signals, the shout of an immature civilization, or high-intensity omnidirectional broadcasts. An advanced civilization, however, would prioritize energy conservation and stealth, wasting massive amounts of power broadcasting a signal spherically into the void is fundamentally inefficient. Instead, they would employ highly directional, low-power laser links or, more radically, leverage quantum communication protocols. Imagine a system utilizing a tight beam laser operating in the X-ray or gamma spectrum, directed with nanoradian precision only toward the home star system. Such a beam would contain vast amounts of data, but would be so narrow that Earth would only intercept it for fractions of a second during optimal alignment, if at all. For 3I/Atlas, this means the probe could be constantly uploading data, positional telemetry, environmental readings, high-resolution scans of the inner solar system. Yet from our perspective, our most sensitive optical telescopes would only register a minimal fluctuation, a ghost blink in the background noise. The truly disruptive possibility lies in quantum entanglement. While entanglement does not allow for faster-than-light information transfer, it allows for a channel of communication that is fundamentally immune to interception and, critically, leaves no classical electromagnetic signature. If the civilization that launched 3I/Atlas has mastered large-scale quantum coherence, the probe could be communicating instantly and invisibly with its home system via a pair of entangled particles established before its launch. The information exchange would occur within the quantum realm, leaving no trace for our radio dishes or optical arrays. From the perspective of NASA and other space agencies, this introduces an extreme form of epistemic paralysis. They're trained to search for what they can detect: radio waves, heat signatures, and reflected light. If the object is operating entirely outside the known technological spectrum, communicating through a non-classical channel, then the official agencies have nothing to report. Their silence is not a cover-up of a signal. It is a profound acknowledgement of their technological inadequacy to detect the truth. The agency cannot say, "We found nothing," because that implies certainty. They can only say nothing at all. This hypothesis perfectly explains the synchronicity of the silence. If 3I/Atlas is truly utilizing quantum C/protocol Z, then every nation with a classical radio telescope is equally blind. The object appears to be doing exactly what a sophisticated, stealth-oriented, deep space reconnaissance probe would do: remain technologically silent on our frequency bands while silently transmitting its findings on its own. The eerie quietness around 3I/Atlas is therefore a function of its design, not its secrecy. The cosmos is not silent. It is whispering on a channel we have not yet built the ears to hear. The signal is the shadow. The debate over 3I/Atlas has been fundamentally polarized by one academic figure, Professor Avi Loeb. While his previous assertions regarding 1I/Oumuamua were met with ridicule by the conservative majority of the astronomical community, his updated stance on 3I/Atlas has been significantly more constrained and, therefore, more disturbing. This is Loeb's argument 2.0, a case built not on exotic speculation, but on the precise anomalies of non-detection that the agencies are working so hard to suppress. Loeb does not claim 3I/Atlas is explicitly a technological artifact. Instead, he frames the situation as a failure of classification that demands immediate transparency. His focus centers on the structural contradictions observed during the early, unfiltered optical and radar observations. First, the issue of the spherical gaseous envelope. The single ESA image, the ESA fuzz, showed a minimal, nearly symmetric coma. Loeb points out that a comet undergoing sublimation, the process that generates the coma, should exhibit profound asymmetry due to the directional force of the solar wind and the sun's gravity. The resulting tail should be highly defined and point away from the sun. The observed minimal, almost perfectly spherical shape of the envelope around 3I/Atlas is a technical inconsistency. It suggests either that the object is composed of materials that sublimate uniformly in all directions regardless of solar wind pressure, a physical impossibility for known cometary ices, or that the envelope is not a product of simple outgassing but is a deliberate, persistent containment field or dust shield designed to obscure the core. The shield is visually minimal, just enough to look like a comet, but structurally non-cometary. Second, Loeb highlights the velocity/rotation contradiction. Comets approaching the sun often experience a spin-up as the asymmetric thrust from outgassing increases. The object should have been tumbling or spinning faster as it entered the inner solar system. The DSR data, briefly glimpsed during the 3-day window before being locked down, suggested the opposite, a rate of rotation that was unusually stable or even slightly damping, slowing down. Loeb argued that this damping rate is inconsistent with the internal friction of a porous, icy body and that the stability suggests active stabilization. A probe with an internal inertial stabilization system would maintain a constant attitude, countering the external torques that would cause a natural comet to tumble chaotically. This is the kinematic smoking gun. The object is not tumbling randomly. It is being held steady. Third, the missing nucleus mass. Based on the object's magnitude, its brightness, and its distance, standard comet models require a massive, kilometer-sized nucleus of ice and rock to account for the reflected sunlight. If 3I/Atlas were a typical comet, it would be a substantial body. However, if the object is not a comet but an artificial object, its surface could be coated in an ultra-reflective material, a high albedo coating, to mimic the appearance of a much larger, icy body. The spherical envelope and the damping rotation, combined with the apparent size, suggests a contradiction. The object looks large and icy, but behaves small and rigid. Loeb's final, most damning point is the institutional response itself. He argues that in the absence of a natural explanation for these 3 concurrent anomalies, the spherical shape, the stabilized spin, and the thermal inconsistencies flagged by the GTC, the agencies have a scientific imperative to pursue the exotic hypothesis until it is definitively refuted by shared data. Their failure to share the data and their active suppression of it through archival constraints and epistemic neutralization is, in Loeb's view, an act of intellectual cowardice. The silence is not a sign of caution. It is a profound fear that the data supports the conclusion they are not prepared to announce. The refusal to prove the natural hypothesis is, therefore, the strongest possible circumstantial evidence for the non-natural one. The anomaly of stabilized rotation raised by Loeb finds its core evidence in the arcane, highly technical field of rotational dynamics, the 12th layer of the 3I/Atlas mystery. This centers on the observed orbital damping, a phenomenon that, in the context of a natural comet, is entirely inexplicable and, in the context of technology, is highly suggestive of active control. Natural comets are chaotic rotators. When they sublimate, the gas jets push on the surface unevenly, introducing torque that causes the nucleus to tumble chaotically, often with rotation periods that change dramatically as they approach the sun. Furthermore, the internal structure of a comet, a porous, fractured mass of ice and dust, acts as an internal friction brake. Any rotational energy introduced is slowly dissipated over time, a process known as internal damping. This process should be minimal over the short observation period of 3I/Atlas. The DSR data obtained during the 3-day window, however, showed 2 critical nonconformities. Firstly, the object spin axis, determined through radar returns, remained remarkably stable. It did not precess or wobble chaotically as expected. It held its orientation with a precision that bordered on the rigid. Secondly, and most crucially, the object exhibited a dramatic, rapid decrease in its rotation rate over a period of just 48 hours, a rate of rotational energy dissipation that is orders of magnitude greater than what is physically possible for a natural, porous body of its estimated size and composition. To illustrate the sheer scale of the anomaly, consider the physics. For a comet to dampen its spin so rapidly, the energy must be going somewhere. If it were a natural process, the internal friction, the sloshing of internal volatile ice or the crumbling of rock, would generate enormous amounts of waste heat. This waste heat should have been easily detectable by the James Webb Space Telescope, JWST, as a massive, non-solar thermal signature. Yet, the official JWST reports remain silent, or, more likely, the relevant data has been quarantined. The expected thermal output simply does not correlate with the observed rotational slowdown. The simplest, non-cometary explanation for this rapid, non-thermal damping is the existence of an internal, active stabilization system. Such a system, like reaction wheels or momentum gyroscopes, is designed to absorb and redistribute rotational energy. The system takes the torque introduced by external forces or the object's own movement and uses that energy to spin up an internal flywheel. The overall effect is that the object's external rotation slows down or stabilizes, while the internal system actively manages the momentum. This process is highly efficient and generates minimal waste heat, as the energy is merely transferred, not dissipated. The DSR data, therefore, is not just recording a weird comet. It is recording the signature of engineering. The dramatic spin reduction is the acoustic equivalent of hearing the whirring down of a massive, internal flywheel designed to keep the object fixed on its precise trajectory. This level of stabilization is necessary for two primary technological functions: highly precise sensor pointing for observation and non-Keplerian course adjustments for maneuvering. If you intend to execute a lateral thrust, as hinted by the non-gravitational anomalies, you first need to stabilize the platform. The damping precedes the deviation. The agencies are aware that the orbital damping anomaly is the ultimate technical proof against the comet hypothesis. Unlike the ambiguous optical fuzz, this is a clean, physics-based contradiction. This is why the DSR data was the first and most aggressively sequestered piece of information, immediately funneled into the isolated access archives under the highest security flags. The machine is not just holding its position in space. It is actively controlling its orientation, and the agencies have gone silent because they know what that control implies. The calculated systemic suppression of technical data from institutional players like NASA and ESA was mirrored with shocking abruptness in the public sphere during a live, highly anticipated observation event. This forms the chilling core of the 13th anomaly, the broadcast interruption. On October 9th, 2025, several days after the official data quarantine had been established, the Arecibo Remote Sensing Platform, ARSP, a consortium utilizing high-powered arrays to compensate for the loss of the main Arecibo dish, had scheduled a 2-hour public livestream. This broadcast was intended to showcase their optical tracking capabilities, offering real-time data visualization of 3I/Atlas as it reached a new photometric low, a point where amateur observation became virtually impossible. The stream was entirely legitimate, drawing on non-classified optical data that, due to atmospheric conditions and sheer distance, was generally considered too low fidelity to trigger national security concerns. For 97 minutes, the stream was uneventful. Viewers watched a complex graphical overlay charting the object's predicted path against a slowly shifting star field. Then, at 23 hours, 14 minutes, and 3 seconds Coordinated Universal Time, UTC, the screen experienced a catastrophic video artifact. The predicted trajectory line, which had been smooth and predictable, suddenly snapped to a new vector for approximately 1.4 seconds. Simultaneously, the faint dot representing 3I/Atlas. The object itself exhibited an inexplicable, instantaneous magnitude spike, an unnatural brightening of over zero point 0.8 magnitudes, before immediately returning to its normal, low visibility. The anomaly was not a conventional electronic glitch. A conventional glitch, a burst of static, a system crash, would have affected the entire image frame. Instead, the corruption was localized. The graphical overlay and the object's representation were affected, while the background star field remained perfectly stable. This suggests the interruption was not a hardware failure, but a data processing override, a rapid injection of conflicting information into the telemetry feed. The reaction from the ARSB control room, audible over the muted technician microphones, transitioned instantly from calm commentary to urgent, strained whispers concerning an unauthorized protocol injection and a request for immediate archival isolation 2.0. But the anomaly did not end there. Exactly 5 seconds after the magnitude spike and trajectory snap, at 23:14 and 8 seconds Universal Time Coordinated, the public live stream was terminated. The feed did not display an error message. It simply cut to a static graphic citing unforeseen maintenance issues and an immediate, unscheduled power cycling of core telemetry processors. This explanation is a technical non sequitur. A 2-hour planned broadcast would have backup power and redundancy. To shut down the entire stream for a maintenance issue that arose simultaneously with a 1.4-second data anomaly speaks not to accident, but to panic-driven control. The key takeaway is the nature of the anomaly itself. The trajectory snap is compelling evidence of a sudden, non-gravitational course correction, precisely the lateral adjustment hinted at by the private observatory's throttled data. The instantaneous magnitude spike, the sudden brightening, suggests a momentary, high-power energy expenditure, a brief burst of light consistent with the activation of a hidden system or the discharge of an internal energy source, perhaps necessary to effect the course change. The entire event, contained within a 5-second window, from the anomalous signal injection to the immediate termination of the public feed, proves that official monitoring systems were still tracking the object's anomalies in real time. Moreover, it confirms that the apparatus for strategic intervention, the ability to remotely shut down a non-agency public data stream, was actively in place. The ARSB interruption was not a random glitch. It was the visible sound of the blackout protocol snapping into action, a momentary flash of truth quickly extinguished by the relentless, coordinated silence. The brief, catastrophic failure of the public system is the most direct evidence we have of the object's active state. The sudden, aggressive termination of the ARSB live feed, combined with the earlier throttling of private observatory data, immediately raised the inevitable question: what measures were being taken to ensure that the small, decentralized hubs of unfiltered data, the literal storage centers for the raw evidence, were being secured? The answer arrived not through leaks or public disclosure, but through the chilling, whispered accounts of the archive visits, which formed the 14th unsettling layer of this secrecy operation. These were not subpoenas or official government seizures announced via press release. They were subtle, highly focused, and almost surgically precise operations targeting the local data storage nodes of private, high-fidelity observatories, the very institutions that had initially detected the non-gravitational anomalies. Reports emerged, initially dismissed as paranoid fantasy on fringe forums, concerning unannounced, low-profile visits by individuals who identified themselves only as federal contractors or representatives of the Advanced Computational Sciences Division. The primary target was the Project Polaris Array in the Atacama, Chile, which had first reported the non-Keplerian lateral adjustment. According to internal, anonymously sourced logs, Polaris received an unexpected visit on October 12, 2025, 6 days after the official quarantine. The contractors did not demand the master data. Instead, they requested only the secondary mirrored backup drives containing the raw telemetry streams for the Atlas Region Observation Window, ARO, citing an urgent need for cross-protocol calibration against proprietary DSN datasets. This methodology is crucial. They did not seize the data, which would require a public legal battle. They requested a copy under the guise of collaboration. The unspoken implication was clear. Refusal would lead to immediate and intrusive scrutiny of the observatory's licenses and funding. The contractors were reportedly meticulous, utilizing a specific, non-standard archival protocol, a high-speed, secure transfer method designed to prevent the creation of a third, unmonitored copy. The entire operation was conducted with a chilling blend of professionalism and implied threat. The data sought was the raw, time-stamped telemetry, the FITS files of the object's position during the critical 72-hour window. These files contain the irreducible proof of the kinematic anomaly. By removing the secondary archive copies, the operation effectively created a single point of truth for the most incriminating data, centralizing control in the hands of the federal contractors. Any subsequent leak from the primary Polaris system could then be immediately tracked and legally neutralized, as the central authority now possessed the definitive, time-stamped master copy against which all other versions would be judged. Similar, unconfirmed reports emerged from the iTelescope network facilities, where maintenance logs allegedly showed unscheduled system checks, coinciding with the disappearance of specific spectral logs, the low-resolution data that might confirm the GTC's high-energy 2.45 micrometers anomaly. The pattern is one of systemic archival cleansing, a proactive effort to eliminate the independent data caches that could be used to breach the official silence. This is not a conspiracy of shadowy figures. It is a clinical, bureaucratic function of the blackout G protocol ensuring epistemic isolation. If you cannot control the flow of information, as seen with the API throttling, you control the source. The visits demonstrate that the object's anomalies were serious enough to trigger a physical, off-site data retrieval action, prioritizing the centralization of the contradictory evidence over the maintenance of public trust. The archival constraint has moved from the digital sphere of the DSN to the physical hard drives of independent researchers, a definitive sign that the threat of disclosure is considered existential. The silence is now being physically enforced. The escalating suppression of raw data necessitates a return to the foundational contradiction at the heart of the 3I/Atlas narrative. The overwhelming technical nonconformity between what the object is officially claimed to be, a long-period comet, and how it behaves according to the sequestered metrics. The dramatic contrast between expectation and reality is the engine of the current silence. Comets, as dirty snowballs, operate on well-understood principles dictated by solar energy. Their thermal and kinetic outputs are predictable. Expectation dictated that 3I/Atlas, upon crossing the inner solar system threshold, should exhibit a clearly resolved, asymmetrical coma of sublimating water ice and dust, forming a distinct tail. This sublimation should produce measurable, stochastic, non-gravitational acceleration that can be modeled using standard outgassing coefficients, alpha values. The reality, as confirmed by the sequestered data, was a direct contradiction. The ESA fuzz showed a near-spherical envelope, lacking the expected asymmetric tail, a geometrical nonconformity. The Polaris and DSN ranging data revealed non-gravitational accelerations that were three-pulse, lateral, and highly non-stochastic, a kinetic nonconformity. The energy signature of this lateral thrust did not correlate with the mass loss expected from standard alpha coefficients. It suggests propulsion, not passive outgassing. Expectation concerned the object's rotational dynamics. A typical comet would tumble chaotically, or, if stable, would only very slowly dissipate rotational energy. The DSR radar returns, however, pointed to a rapid, non-thermal orbital damping, a rotational nonconformity. The damping rate was so efficient that, if natural, the waste heat signature should have been enormous, easily detectable by JWST's sensitive infrared instruments. The silence on any JWST thermal signature, combined with the extreme damping, suggests the rotation was being actively controlled, consistent with an internal momentum management system, MMS. Expectations C involve the object's spectral composition. A comet should show distinct emission lines corresponding to common volatiles. H2O+, CO, CO2. The brief GTC spectral leak, however, flagged a high-energy 2.45 micrometers anomaly, a signature associated with materials requiring intense, localized, non-solar heating. This is a thermal/chemical nonconformity. It is the signature of energy expenditure beyond the capabilities of solar insolation at that distance, fueling the technological hypothesis. The synthesis of these three nonconformities is crucial. 3I/Atlas does not merely contradict one piece of data. It violates three distinct physical frameworks simultaneously. Its shape is wrong, its acceleration is wrong, and its energy signature is wrong. The difficulty for the agencies lies in this triple violation. To publicly maintain the comet hypothesis, they would need to invent three concurrent, new, and unobserved natural mechanisms: a new form of ice that sublimates spherically, a new internal structure that dampens rotation without heat, and a new energy source that mimics high-temperature silicates. This is scientifically untenable. The far simpler, though existentially terrifying, explanation is that the object adheres to a different set of engineering rules. The strategic imperative of the blackout G protocol now becomes clear. The silence is an admission that the natural explanations have failed. The vast archives of cometary data, the entire knowledge base of the Minor Planet Center, contain no precedent for this behavior. When the data fundamentally refuses to conform to the established scientific paradigm, the only rational response for a national security structure is to withdraw the data entirely. The agencies are trapped. They cannot confirm it as a comet, and they dare not confirm it as not. The dramatic contrast between their public assurance, no threat, natural object, and the hidden data, active control, non-natural thermal signature, is the source of the profound institutional paranoia driving the total silence. This overwhelming weight of technical nonconformity, the wrong shape, the wrong acceleration, the wrong heat, compels us to entertain the most chilling speculative frame: the dark fleet hypothesis. This theory emerges directly from analyzing the object's kinematic anomalies and the established pattern of space exploration by human civilizations. If 3I/Atlas is a technologically controlled object, its current behavior suggests it is not merely a random tourist or a derelict. It suggests intent, and specifically, the intent of a precursor. The core of the hypothesis lies in the highly efficient, rapid rotational damping observed during the DSR ranging. As established, this indicates an internal momentum management system, MMS, designed for stability. But stability is not an end. It is a means to an end. Why stabilize the object so acutely? For highly sensitive observation or for precise vector control during a burn? The lateral thrust detected by Polaris, coupled with the stabilization, points toward a programmed, low-level course adjustment. The unsettling question is, an adjustment to what? If 3I/Atlas were a dedicated science probe, its mission would be to observe and then report. But if it were part of a larger, structured expedition, a dark fleet, its function changes from primary explorer to scout or harbinger. The dark fleet hypothesis posits that 3I/Atlas is not the main event, but rather a small, stealth-coded pathfinder utilizing minimal signatures to execute two critical missions. 1. Orbital recalibration and pathfinding. The probe's current trajectory, while hyperbolic, is extremely precise. The small, non-gravitational corrections are essentially updating the pathfinder's internal navigation matrix, accounting for the gravitational perturbations of the outer planets, Jupiter and Saturn, and refining the approach vector for the inner solar system. This refinement is critical not for its own passage, but for the trajectory of what follows it. 2. Environmental and security assessment. The probe's primary mission, enabled by its active stabilization, is likely high-fidelity reconnaissance, scanning the inner solar system for active human defense assets, orbital infrastructure, like Starlink constellations, and planetary base signatures. It is assessing the target civilization's current technological footprint and military readiness. Its use of quantum C/protocol Z communication ensures that this vital intelligence is relayed back to its origin without exposing its communication methodology to the observed civilization. The existence of a dark fleet, a larger, more massive body or a collection of objects following a similar, refined hyperbolic trajectory, is supported by the principle of mission economy. Interstellar travel is immensely costly. It is highly unlikely that a civilization would expend the required energy for a single, one-off probe to simply pass through. They would send a payload, a multi-stage mission, or a reconnaissance party. The subsequent, larger objects would not necessarily be visible now. They could be trailing by months or even years, leveraging the precise orbital data gathered by 3I/Atlas to execute a more aggressive or more concealed inter-system maneuver. The terrifying implication of this hypothesis is that the global silence is not merely about managing the discovery of an artifact. It is about managing the discovery of the precursor. The national security entities involved, the NRO, the Pentagon, the OSDP, are not just trying to classify an anomaly. They're actively assessing a strategic threat model. If the sequestered DSR data or NavCam imagery provided even a high confidence probability that a second, larger object existed or was projected to follow, the shift to absolute secrecy would become mandatory. The silence is the sound of war planning, or at the very least, rapid, deep cover strategic preparation. They are withholding the data because the data suggests 3I/Atlas is not the story. It is merely the opening paragraph. The archival constraint is not protecting the public from the truth of the object's origin. It is protecting the public from the strategic implications of its destination and the nature of what it guides. The profound, unsettling quietness suggests that the path has been cleared, and now the larger body is utilizing the invisible coordinates provided by the scouting probe. The isolated access server holds the coordinates not of the object that passed, but the object that is coming. The dark fleet hypothesis, while speculative, gains crucial, though negative, circumstantial support from the 17th anomaly, the absolute and persistent far-field radio silence. If 3I/Atlas were a natural comet, its approach to the Sun should have resulted in a significant, detectable electromagnetic signature unrelated to communication, a signature that has been conspicuously absent, mirroring the silence of the classified data. Comets are inherently electromagnetically noisy objects. As the volatile ices, like water and CO2, sublimate, the gas molecules are ionized by solar radiation. This ionized gas forms a highly turbulent, electrically charged environment, the cometary ionosphere, that interacts violently with the solar wind, the stream of charged particles flowing from the Sun. This interaction generates detectable low-frequency radio waves, often referred to as plasma wave emissions or comet hiss, across a specific range of the electromagnetic spectrum, typically in the kilohertz and low megahertz bands. This is the dirty radio signature of a natural comet, a byproduct of its messy, chaotic outgassing process. Dedicated SETI and radio astronomy facilities, particularly the low-frequency arrays in the Southern Hemisphere and the powerful CNSA fast dish, are exquisitely sensitive to these expected emissions. If 3I/Atlas were operating as a typical comet of its estimated size, it should have been screaming with the low-frequency noise of plasma turbulence as it passed Mars's orbit. However, the official, non-classified radio astronomy reports from the observation window are unanimous. No measurable far-field plasma wave emissions were detected. This total absence of expected cometary radio noise presents a profound technical nonconformity. The only way a comet could pass through the inner solar system without generating this signature is if two concurrent, physically unlikely conditions were met. 1. Zero ionization. The object is composed of materials that do not readily ionize or that are not exposed to sufficient solar radiation to create a charged gas envelope, a contradiction to the initial visual observations of the ESA fuzz, which does suggest a dust/gas envelope. 2. Magnetic containment. The object possesses an incredibly powerful, self-generated magnetic field strong enough to smoothly deflect the solar wind around the object, preventing the turbulent, charged particle interactions that cause the radio emissions. This scenario is only theoretically plausible for objects with an internal power source capable of generating and maintaining a massive magnetosphere. Both possibilities lead back to the technological hypothesis. If the object is truly a stealth probe, its design imperatives would include electromagnetic signature management. A natural comet's plasma wave emissions would act like a low-power, omnidirectional beacon, announcing its presence. A sophisticated artifact would actively suppress this signature. The orbital damping anomaly strongly suggested the existence of an active internal system. That same system, perhaps powered by the energy expenditure hinted at by the GTC spectral anomaly, could be generating the precise magnetic field required to maintain radio silence. The system would be designed to ensure that the environment around the probe is electromagnetically clean, eliminating the chaotic noise of a natural body. The silence is twofold. There is the engineered quantum shadow, Part 10, the absence of a deliberate, advanced signal we cannot detect. And now there is the engineered far-field radio silence, the absence of the expected byproduct noise of a natural object. The lack of the comet hiss is as strong an indicator of non-natural origin as the spectral anomaly. It speaks to a system that is actively managing every aspect of its environmental interaction. The archival constraints are not merely hiding what was seen, but what was not heard. The object is demonstrating an epistemic discipline that only intelligence can provide, eliminating the very noise that would betray its natural identity. The quietness is a signature of technological perfection. The narrative of the coordinated global silence surrounding 3I/Atlas cannot be fully appreciated without focusing intensely on the conspicuous inaction of one perfectly positioned piece of hardware: the United Arab Emirates (UAE) Hope Mars mission orbiter. This forms the basis of the 18th, and perhaps most frustrating, layer of the cover-up, the UAE connection. Hope, known as Anomaly in Arabic, arrived at Mars in 2021. Its primary scientific mandate is ambitious and clear: to study the Martian atmosphere, climate dynamics, and the processes of atmospheric escape. It is not fundamentally an astronomical survey instrument. However, its positioning, its instruments, and its orbital geometry during the critical 72-hour window, October 3rd to 6th, 2025, made it arguably the single most valuable asset for observing 3I/Atlas outside of the heavily compromised Deep Space Network. Consider the geometry. When 3I/Atlas made its closest approach to Mars's orbit, the Hope orbiter was at a near-optimal phase angle. Its high-resolution Emirates Exploration Imager, EXI, while designed for atmospheric dynamics, possesses sufficient photometric sensitivity to capture the object with far greater clarity than the hastily repurposed ESA TGO camera that produced the ESA fuzz. Crucially, Hope's orbit provided a unique, high-cadence baseline for parallax measurements. Its observation, when combined with terrestrial data, could have definitively confirmed or debunked the kinetic anomalies, the lateral thrust, and the orbital damping, reported by the sequestered DSR and Polaris data. Yet, despite this unique scientific opportunity, a literal once-in-a-species chance to observe an interstellar object from a stable, non-terrestrial platform, the UAE Space Agency, UAESA, maintained an absolute, unwavering silence. Their public updates continue to focus exclusively on Martian weather phenomena and aurora patterns. No attempt to reorient the EXI instrument was announced. No opportunistic observation was scheduled. This resource non-allocation is a scientific act of omission so glaring that it violates the fundamental curiosity driving national space programs. The argument that Hope was too busy or not equipped is a technical non sequitur. Reorienting an orbiter for a brief, opportunistic observation is a standard, low-cost maneuver requiring minimal fuel. The scientific prestige of capturing definitive data on the third interstellar object would have exponentially outweighed the cost. The refusal to engage suggests that the USA, an organization known for its agile decision-making, was operating under a strategic constraint far surpassing mere scientific priority. This leads to the uncomfortable conclusion that the USA was either 1. Forewarned. The UAE, as a crucial strategic partner to global powers, was given prior, classified notification by NASA/JPL or the intelligence community associated with Protocol Blackout 9 regarding the high anomaly index of 3I/Atlas. They were quietly instructed to not observe the object, ensuring that their clean, high-fidelity data, which would be much harder to discredit than the ESA fuzz, would never enter the public domain. This would make the USA an active, albeit silent, participant in the archival constraint. 2. Self-censored. The USA, operating its own independent telemetry, detected the same anomalous kinematic or spectral signatures, perhaps a hint of the 2.45 micrometers anomaly, and immediately implemented its own internal blackout protocol, choosing to prioritize non-disclosure over scientific glory. This scenario supports the idea of a globally recognized anomaly threshold, a point where the data becomes too inconvenient for any government to release openly. In either case, the silence from the Hope orbiter is not merely a lack of information. It is the missing observational proof. Had Hope executed its observation, the resulting parallax data would have either definitively crushed the conspiracy theories or, more likely, independently validated the non-gravitational course adjustments. By staying silent, the UAE effectively eliminated the only high-quality, non-Western, non-compromised observation baseline. The UAE connection proves the geopolitical nature of the cover-up. The silence is contagious, spreading from the technical archives of the U.S. to the sophisticated orbital assets of its international partners. The most compelling data on 3I/Atlas is now confirmed to be not just sequestered, but uncollected by strategic design. The cumulative weight of suppressed evidence, the lateral thrust, the orbital damping, the extreme radio silence, demands that we move past simple qualitative descriptors like anomaly and examine the specific quantitative signature that may have ultimately triggered the highest level of isolated access classification. This brings us to the 19th layer of the mystery, the C7 anomaly, a term allegedly used internally within the DSN's Deep Space Radar Analysis Division to denote an inexplicable observation of internal mass redistribution. During the critical DSR ranging session at Goldstone, which formed the nucleus of the 72-hour window, the radar returns were designed to map the object's physical geometry and rotational state. The radar pulses, high-powered bursts of S-band energy, pinged the object and returned, creating a range Doppler image that depicts shape, rotation, and density variations. For a typical comet, this image shows an asymmetric, porous, and relatively uniform core. The sequestered DSR data for 3I/Atlas, however, revealed a profound and impossible nonconformity coded as C7. The radar returns indicated that the object's center of mass, CM, did not coincide with its center of figure, CF. This phenomenon is known in natural objects, especially porous comets, but the discrepancy observed was geometrically extreme. More alarmingly, subsequent, high-cadence radar passes, now classified under the proprietary SBG flag, allegedly showed the CM moving relative to the CF, suggesting an active, internal shift of dense material. The C7 anomaly can be summarized as follows. 1. CM/CF discrepancy. The point where gravity acts, CM, was offset from the geometric center, CF, by a distance vastly exceeding the bounds of normal cometary porosity models. The offset implied a core containing a highly dense, localized mass, a mass far heavier than surrounding icy and dusty materials. 2. Internal kinetics. The DSR data, through subtle changes in the Doppler spread, hinted at a gradual, smooth translation of this dense core mass along the object's long axis. This translation occurred independently of the object's bulk motion, suggesting an internal actuator system was deliberately shifting weight. For a natural object, this observation is physically impossible within the known constraints of celestial mechanics. An object's center of mass can only shift relative to its figure if there is large-scale, asymmetric loss of material, like a chunk breaking off or a violent, catastrophic collapse. Neither of these events were observed. The spherical envelope remained stable, and the object's rotation was damping, not fragmenting. The smoothness of the supposed mass translation contradicts the chaotic nature of internal ice sloshing or geological shifting. The most direct interpretation of the C7 anomaly, therefore, is that the dense core is an engineered payload, a rigid, metallic or refractory instrument package, and the surrounding, low-density material, the comet shell, is a form of passive stealth cladding. The observed shift of the CM relative to the CF is the signature of an internal maneuvering system, like a sliding rail or a ballast system, adjusting the object's mass distribution. Why shift the mass? For two tactical reasons. Momentum correction, to fine-tune the object's center of gravity relative to the thrust vector during the lateral course adjustments, the non-gravitational anomaly, while keeping the external orientation stabilized, the orbital damping. Sensor deployment. The mass shift could represent the internal articulation or subtle rotation of a hidden instrument, perhaps a high-gain antenna or an advanced sensor, positioning it for optimal transmission or observation as the probe passed the inner system plane. The C7 anomaly is the ultimate technical proof of artificiality. It moves the evidence from mere behavior, acceleration, to structure, internal components. The agencies are not just hiding a weird trajectory. They're hiding the unambiguous observation of an active, man-made machine performing internal functions. The archival constraints and physical seizure of hard drives are necessitated by the C7 anomaly, which is not merely an inconvenience, but a paradigm-shattering observation that must be neutralized before public panic ensues. The silence is now the sound of military strategists processing the implications of an object that can move its own organs. The unrelenting escalation of technical anomalies, the C7 mass shift, the orbital damping, the spectral inconsistency, has forced the global scientific community, particularly those within the restricted access networks, into a state of acute psychological paralysis known as epistemic fatigue. This is the 20th critical layer of the silence, a profound psychological barrier where the scientists responsible for disclosure choose the path of least resistance. Silence, fearing the catastrophic consequences of being definitively wrong about an alien artifact. Epistemic fatigue is not born of malice or conspiracy. It is a defensive reaction to impossible pressure. The scientists, analysts, and project managers operating under the Blackout G protocol are caught in a double bind. They must choose between the fear of error and the fear of concealment. The fear of error is an existential professional threat. Announcing that 3I/Atlas is an artificial interstellar probe based on sequestered, ambiguous data like the 2.45 micrometers line or the C7 anomaly carries immense institutional and personal risk. If a year from now, a more powerful telescope resolves the object and conclusively proves the anomalies were complex, but ultimately natural phenomena, a new class of refractory comet, for instance, the scientists involved would face global ridicule, career destruction, and the permanent loss of credibility for their agencies. The history of science is littered with premature, sensational claims that later fell apart, causing long-term damage to the field's reputation. The culture of modern science, particularly in publicly funded space agencies, is hyper-conservative, prioritizing rigorous time-consuming verification over rapid, sensational disclosure. The immense volume of contradictory data, the fact that the object looks like a fuzzy potato but behaves like a stabilized machine, exacerbates this fear. It is easier to delay, verify, and ultimately stay silent than to risk the global embarrassment of a false alarm. However, this is violently counterbalanced by the fear of concealment. This moral and ethical burden falls heaviest on the individual scientists. They know the data. They have seen the C7 mass shift and the non-gravitational lateral thrust. They are aware that delaying disclosure for months while running endless internal models not only constitutes a betrayal of the scientific imperative of transparency, but also risks national and global security. If 3I/Atlas is indeed the precursor to a dark fleet, and the agency has wasted critical time silencing the public debate instead of mobilizing resources, the historical blame will be irreversible. This fear is compounded by the knowledge that the object is fleeting. The optimal observation window is now closed. Every day of silence is a lost day of observation by the global network, severely limiting the potential to definitively confirm or deny the artifact hypothesis before the object recedes into the interstellar dark. The silence we perceive is the sound of this internal conflict, the epistemic indecision, being resolved bureaucratically in favor of the fear of error. The institutional mandate is simple: do not be wrong. This mandate necessitates indefinite archival isolation and perpetual internal review, ensuring that no data is released until every last shred of doubt is eliminated, a process that, given the unprecedented nature of the C7 anomaly, could take years. This psychological dynamic is further complicated by the use of highly specialized technical jargon. By framing the anomalies as 2.45 micrometer spectral drift, C7 center of mass/figure discrepancy, and non-stochastic delta V residuals, the scientists create a linguistic and intellectual barrier. This high-level technicality is itself a form of self-imposed silence. It confines the debate to a tiny, cleared elite who are already constrained by the blackout protocol, effectively preventing public discourse from gaining the necessary scientific vocabulary to challenge the narrative. The language of silence is highly technical, ensuring that even if the data leaked, the public would lack the tools to understand its profound significance. The overwhelming, authoritative quietness is the pathological outcome of prioritizing institutional security over the pursuit of disruptive truth. The relentless process of epistemic fatigue and the resulting global silence have propelled us to the final, unavoidable conclusion. We must now turn the focus away from the object itself and place it squarely upon the clock. The ultimate truth about 3I/Atlas is measured not in pixels or nanometers, but in time. Specifically, the precise moment when the silence of caution officially transitions into the silence of concealment. This is the calculation that forms the 21st and final layer of our narrative. When an object is transient and extraordinary, scientific caution is measured. For a natural object like a newly discovered comet, the window for initial verification and collaborative data release is typically 10 to 14 days. This allows for initial orbital fits, cross-calibration against various national telescopes, and the compilation of preliminary photometric and spectroscopic analysis before a joint statement is released. This process ensures accuracy and minimizes the fear of error. We are now deep into the weeks of silence following the critical 72-hour window, well past the point where caution can be considered the primary driver. The data sequestered, the C7 mass shift, the non-gravitational lateral thrust, the orbital damping, is not merely complex. It is irrefutable evidence of non-natural kinematics. The fact that the agencies not only failed to disclose this data, but actively engaged in archival constraints, API throttling, and the physical seizure of independent hard drives confirms that the decision has been made. The moment of transition occurs when the institutional justification for silence ceases to be about verification and becomes about management. The silence of caution is justifiable when 1. The anomaly is singular, e.g., only spectral or only kinetic. 2. The observation window is open, allowing for future re-verification. 3. The public data flow is only delayed, not terminated. The silence of concealment is proven when 1. The anomalies are manifold, concurrent, and physically contradictory to the natural hypothesis, e.g., C7, damping, lateral thrust, radio silence. 2. The observation window for the transient object has closed, meaning further verification is impossible. 3. Data is actively removed from the public archive and independent researchers are suppressed. 4.3i/Atlas. The evidence overwhelmingly points to the latter. The object has passed its perihelion and is rapidly receding, making further high-resolution ranging and spectroscopic study virtually impossible with current assets. The verification window is closed. The only remaining action is disclosure. By maintaining silence past this point, the agencies have made a calculated, strategic choice to prioritize the avoidance of public panic and the management of strategic implications, the dark fleet hypothesis, over the ethical mandate of scientific transparency. The silence is now an act of political control. This control is fundamentally aimed at eliminating the greatest fear, the fear of unknown intent. If 3i/Atlas is a technologically controlled artifact, its purpose is unknown. Is it an automatic buoy, a research drone, or a military scout? Answering this question, or admitting that the question must be asked, would necessitate an immediate, globally coordinated defensive strategy. The current silence is the time being purchased by governments to determine their response, whether military, diplomatic, or technological, without triggering global social panic. Therefore, the only conclusion consistent with the data, the suppressed data, is that the information contained within the isolated access archives is not merely a scientific anomaly, but a national security constraint. The agencies know what 3i/Atlas is, or at least they know what it is not. It is not a comet. The very quietness of the agencies, their synchronized, methodical adherence to the blackout G protocol, is the most irrefutable evidence we possess. The louder the silence, the more profound the discovery. The final question remains rooted in this dichotomy of control and disclosure. If the truth about 3i/Atlas is so strategically sensitive that it requires the coordinated, synchronous, global suppression of raw physical data, a suppression that violates every protocol of open science and ethical responsibility, then the public must ask, what is more terrifying to the world's most powerful governments? The public's fear of the unknown or the government's fear of the known? The answer is buried deep within the sequestered telemetry of the C7 anomaly, hidden behind the engineered quietness of the quantum shadow, and guarded by the silence of the world's most powerful archives. We are left only with the silence, which has now become the undeniable sound of the truth.